Hello and welcome to ommmsome podcast. This space is for you to find out different methods and tips on how to improve your life experience, to empower you to take full responsibility and live fully. Today, I'm truly honored to have a guest who I just feel amazingly thankful for having on this planet. Anthony is the founder of Alchemy of Breath, community of healing that is encouraging everyone to become aware of the simplest thing we all have, our breath and breathing. His online breathing sessions have brought so much bliss to my own life, and that I feel that everyone should know about this. And welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And you said everything I was going to say, all about taking responsibility for your own health, all those wonderful things.
Well, how is breathing for you today?
Well, thanks for reminding me, because you just brought me right back to it, so I can talk again rather than talk about it. It's one of the most extraordinary things that I'm a writer, I'm a wordsmith, and yet I still am challenged to find the right words to describe the potential and the power of something that we take so much for granted. And I love that challenge, and it's an exciting one to me, to keep looking for ways to describe it more appropriately and in a more inspiring way. And it always ends up being just get people to breathe and let the breath do the work. Let your mind fall away, Anthony. You don't really need to talk about it. Just get people breathing, and then they begin, or they often immediately connect to the purpose of it all.
But how would you describe to someone who's, I think many people are curious about what is breath work. They have heard of something, or, in yoga lessons we say, oh, connect with your breath, but what does it really mean? Like, how would you, because I think people have asked you that, millions of times, how would you describe?
Well, it's connecting with life. Our biggest life resource is the breath. It's the one that we can manage for the least time without. It's an unquestionable element, fundamental part of our life, the most fundamental part of our life. That only 3 minutes and the brain dies if we don't have oxygen. But we'd completely forgotten that. Now I need you to remind me what the question was. How do I?
So how would you describe for someone like the breath work that you're actually doing in a practical way? What do they do? What happens?
Well, really, we're breathing a simple breath through the mouth, and we call it a connected breath because we're always breathing. You're never actually pausing at the top of the inhale or at the bottom of the exhale. You're always in the act of doing one or the other. You're either inhaling or exhaling. And we tend to give more focus on the inhale as the claim to life, that human right that we have to claim the most that we can out of this life. So we focus on the inhale, and then we allow the exhale to happen rather than to push it away or to hold on to it. And I think one of the most major distinction between a yoga practitioner and the breath that they would use, which would be called pranayama, and what we do is that pranayama by nature means control. Prana means energy, and yama means to control. But we do the prana bit, but we don't do the control bit. And albeit they don't intend it the way that we don't do it. In other words, yama in Sanskrit, it is more describing the discipline of using the breath in a conscious way. And when I say we don't control, what I mean is that we don't count, we don't use any mental processes when we breathe, other than just to be aware and to be awake. So you might just imagine as you're breathing, you're not counting, you just breathe completely. It doesn't matter, belly, chest, whatever rises first or last. That's all technical. And when you get more advanced, we do work with that and we discover what can happen with different techniques. But the most important thing is to breathe completely. And that means maybe imagining that first breath of your life, what that would have been like. it was just such a huge moment to greet this world with that, a sense of utter wonder, utter unconditional openness and acceptance.
Mm.
When have we ever taken that breath again? We never have. And so what would it look like if we consciously do? If we consciously take that breath in as that first breath that we ever took. And then conversely, we say the same about the exhale.
Yeah.
Take a moment. I mean, there's going to be a time in your life and anybody who's listening's life when they have less than 10 breaths left. And you may not even know that at the time, but that moment is going to happen. And how important would those breaths be at that point? What is there when we know that the last breath that we have is the total let go of everything in this material existence? Then what is it you need to let go of?
Mm.
And when you do it again and again, every 10 or 12 seconds, inhale, exhale, how many opportunities do you have to be reborn? And how many opportunities do you have to let the clutter go that stops the freshness and the newness having the space to exist? So as we get into this inhale and then this exhaustion as a pattern and as a rhythm, we're continually clearing, cleansing with the exhale, making more room, and at the same time inhaling unconditionally, no control. I'm not trying to say what will happen. I'm not expecting anything. I'm just going to receive. I'm going to receive as I claim life. And that's where the magical quality exists. That's why this can be such a pivotal experience, that things we've been working with for years can come clear in one breath.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful description. I love it, especially with the inhale when you're born, and then exhale is really the last thing that's going to be there. You can't help it. You can't hold on to anything. What happens scientifically? I know there's a lot that we know that you experience and this and that, but there are some, for those who are more mind and intellectual and orientated on, I need a proof. What is happening in our bodies when we do this breath work?
Okay, the first thing that's happening is that we're oxygenating the bloodstream.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for that to happen, there are corresponding other effects that occur. One of them, and the most significant, is that the carbon dioxide level in the bloodstream will lower in order to accommodate the increased oxygen. The other thing that we're doing is that we're sending more blood and activating all lobes of the brain, all of them, the frontal, all of the different lobes of the brain are getting activated. And when we start to use breath techniques, we can take it even further. If we go into holding of the breath, for example, we are then exporting the oxygen from the bloodstream into the body and into the brain, which is a more advanced technique where we would hold the breath and just watch and see with our inner eye, of course, because we do this practice with our eyes closed, see exactly what it is that wants to be revealed to us. So essentially, we're bringing more oxygen into the body. Now, I don't want to say this is the only way, because there are different viewpoints. There's a great book written for athletes called The Oxygen Advantage that specifically talks about how we actually breathe too much in our lives. The whole principle of high altitude training is learning to live with less oxygen. There's also another specific type of breath work called Buteyko breath work, which is designed for treatment of asthma and also boosts the immune system, which is based on making do with less breath, learning how to breathe less and to live with that discomfort. So the alchemy of breath, we embrace all of these types of breath work because they all have value. Some people, I know the Oxygen Advantage approach doesn't believe or would not perhaps think that there's value in the type of breath that we do, But I obviously, as you know from experiencing it, there's an enormous value.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And we tend to embrace everybody. So, I mean, I think anything that brings awareness or consciousness to the breath is a healthy thing for humanity.
Mm. And what is the difference, like, how do we, if we compare to daily life, daily breathing, average person, what is happening and what do we do with our breath? I mean, everyone breathes, but how much do we know about it?
Well, the thing is, people get away with as little as they can. And you know that from your own life. You know, so if I said to you right now, breathe, you'd realize that you weren't breathing as much as you could be.
Yeah.
We've learned to get away with as little as we can. And a part of that process has been the traumas we've suffered and the more impactful experiences that we've had that have actually taken away our breath. And it's part of our language that, you know, I caught my breath, or I lost my breath, or it's become a part of our normal common vernacular. What happens especially when we're traumatized, is that we lose our breath altogether. And anything that might approach trauma will stimulate the same brain response, the same hormonal response that the trauma itself produced in the beginning. And that often involves becoming short of breath. So, for example, if you see someone in panic or see someone in high stress, they're not breathing completely. They're breathing less than normal. But the good news is that we can reverse manipulate many conditions by changing our breath consciously, by making changes and making choices. So Fritz Perls, a famous psychologist who was the co-inventor of Gestalt therapy, said some very wise words, which are that anxiety is enthusiasm without the breath.
Wow. That's a
So,
good one.
yeah, it is. And he also said that, and it's true, if you breathe a cycle of breath, if you breathe 6 cycles of breath a minute or less, in other words, you breathe a slow inhale and slow exhale, that you cannot be anxious anymore.
Yeah.
It's true. It's absolutely right. In fact, 6 breaths a minute, 5 seconds inhale and 5 seconds exhale is akin to something called the coherence breath, which has been recognized by the HeartMath Institute in California as a way to create heart coherence. And it's a very powerful breath practice to have. So you see, what we do when we're in group on Sundays is really an introduction. But there are many, many things to discover in this world of breath.
Of course, yeah. So anxiety. So you would say a person who's getting the anxiety attacks, and if in the moment they start, for example, using this deep breath, they could overcome and heal the trauma.
Well, anxiety is usually a symptom of trauma, not the trauma itself. So there would be a perhaps different approach to the release of trauma, which is a very big part of our work. So yes, you will be able to, I mean, for example, one way to approach the trauma would be in a session to have someone imagine the trauma being on a screen that they're watching, and to bring that conscious, slow breath all the way into that experience, into that session. So you wouldn't have the same charging breath that we would normally use in a breath session in group, but you would have a more measured breath that would really be the main tool that the breather would be taking in to that experience and that opportunity. That would be one way of approaching a traumatic experience, which would entail using hypnotherapy at the same time as the breath, which is one of the things that I do. Another way of releasing trauma, which is non-specific, is in other words not targeted, is to allow any movements in the body that wish to happen to occur. And there are different body positions or different ways of stimulating these natural movements to occur. So if we think of prana as energy, which it is, and the air that we breathe brings energy into the body, we often notice quite quickly that there's a tingling or a physical sensation that comes with it. And an exaggerated version, because that physical sensation or that tingling is actually a vibration. It's a fast vibration, and that's what's happening when the prana is coming into, when the energy is coming into the body. That vibration could become more exaggerated, and you might find that your hands are involuntarily trembling, or your knees are shaking, and there are certain body positions that you can go into before a session that will help bring your body into involuntary movements of that nature while you're breathing. That's also an excellent way to go behind the anxiety and to release the trauma. And the good news is, again, because there's lots of good news about this breathing.
I love it.
Yeah, is you don't have to remember it. You don't have to go back into the story of it. You don't want to have to get into the fear or the buildup of tension at all. You can just breathe, and if your body is vibrating or trembling like that, go, yay, yes, thank you, and know that whatever you're discharging is no longer being hosted. In other words, it's being released from your body. The whole thing about trauma is that the moment it happens is the moment it gets embedded into your body. Not just your psyche, but your whole body becomes host. And because it's an incomplete experience and there's no resolution after trauma, it stays stuck. And the joy of this breath is that by bringing the breath into the body, things get to move again. This energy that we bring in becomes energy in motion. We open our circuitry in the body and things begin to flush out.
So basically, with the shorter breath that we go throughout the day, we just never really release or make the actual movement of the prana. Is that correct then?
That's right. We tend to move it less, unless you're an athlete. You know, if you're running, or if you're at the gym, or if you're doing something aerobic, then of course by nature of aerobic, you're bringing in oxygen. You're oxygenating the system, and your circulation is moving more quickly, and it gets, it's no longer stuck. There's no stasis. It becomes more active.
Why do you think more people are not doing this, working with their breath? And I mean, it's a free tool. It's out there. It's like you can do it any place, anywhere. It's there, always with you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, and there are two ways of looking at it. If you look at the amount of people that are not doing it consciously, it's a scary amount. But if you look at the amount of people that are and how quickly it's growing, then it becomes a much more positive interpretation, because we've seen, I mean, Alchemy of Breath alone has breathed over 40,000 people last year, and this year it'll probably be over 100,000. So yeah, we are. It's very exciting. We are. Just last week we breathed 1,700.
Wow.
So it's an incredible, and that's just me. That's not all the facilitators that we've trained that are out there doing it, which are in the hundreds now. So I can't really count what everybody's doing, but I can account for myself and those that I know the best. So it's a very growing thing, and we are just at the beginning, because here's when we think of medicinally or scientifically, we're going to be using breath more and more for diagnosis. So what started in the 1960s to find out whether someone who was driving a car had drunk too much alcohol, which was the breath test, is now evolving into, from the 70s in India, they've been interpreting the breath to diagnose cancer. In the Western world, we now know that with the breath we can predetermine a heart attack. So if someone's in hospital after a heart attack, they can monitor the breath, and up to 45 minutes before another heart attack would occur, there would be changes in the quality of breath.
Oh, wow.
We now use the sweetness of breath to indicate perhaps potential, let me see if I remember this right, it's diabetes, I believe, or digestive issues. We now use the breath to diagnose Helicobacter pylori, which is a killing, a deathly parasite, which many people have, but they don't know that they have. But it's a breath test that we use to diagnose Helicobacter pylori. So we're just at the dawn of seeing this becoming an instant form of diagnosis that is non-invasive and much less expensive than the old ways of blood tests and these archaic ways of trying to find out what's going on in the body. It's said that 70% of our body toxins are expressed through the exhale, come out of the body. So kind of reminds me, I mean, now it's more computerized, but I remember 10 years ago, if you took your car to the mechanic, they'd put this tube over your exhaust pipe.
Yeah.
And go into this computer with all these dials, and they'd be able to tell you the health of your car by virtue of the exhaust pipe and what was coming out. And I think it's, that's exactly where we're headed with the breath.
Yeah, we just forgot that to check ourselves instead of checking our cars.
That's right. That's right. In fact, I just bought a little gizmo off the internet. It's a little box, and it tests your exhale for how your digestive system is working. It costs something like that. And so you can eat your meal and see whether it's fermenting or whether it's being digested properly. You can begin to measure, it gives you a little app that you can record all your meals and your reactions and you slept and and so on. This is just the beginning.
That's amazing. And actually, like, when you're talking about it, I'm like, yeah, but that makes sense. I mean, like, breath is so connected to everything in your body. Why wouldn't you be able to tell all these things? But like, normally you wouldn't think like that, right? Because you just don't know about it yet. Just a sec.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, something with the internet, but yeah, I think I'm back.
Yeah, I got you digitalized there.
Another question about breath retention, because that's what I see Wim Hof is doing, and I mean in yoga we do a lot of that. How do you work with breath retention?
We would use a similar method to Wim Hof's. That's the principle I told you about before, which is to, in fact, when the Wim Hof, the most prominent methodology would be to exhale and hold the breath for as long as you're comfortable, and then to take a big inhale and hold again. And that's really where the export from the bloodstream happens. And that's why sometimes you have an extraordinary experience when you do that, a paranormal experience. The brain uses 20% of our oxygen. 20% of our oxygen supply is brain food. So what if we increase it? What if we increase it by even just 10% or 20%? What's the brain, how much is there to celebrate? Because we think that everything we can think of is what the brain is. But there's so much else that it's capable of doing. If we jump out of our little box of reality, we know from experience that there are other realities that are huge, they're infinite, that our tiny minds are unable to grasp or conceive of. And that's one of the most exciting things about this breath work to me, is that we come to the edge of our consciousness just as simply by virtue of giving our attention to our breath. And then we have a choice. We can stop and come back, because it can be, that's our comfort zone too, our consciousness. So if we get to the edge of it, there is a potential for a little bit of disturbance or a bit of a dizziness or discomfort or nervousness. but we know that the breath isn't going to kill us. It's the only thing that's not going to kill us in the world. I mean, you know, if you're breathing, you're not dead. We know that. So as you continue to breathe and as you trust the breath, then we can make an excursion outside of what we know. We can embrace something beyond what we know. And what might that be? You know, that's the magical quality. And I've seen people have what we would call miracles happen as a result of breathing through their boundary into the other, into the otherness that exists, of which we don't normally have anything to do with. We don't even think about it normally. We go do our list of things we've got to do, the list of have-tos, but we don't really stop and take a long breath.
I just had a I just had a question popping up from breathing, non-breathing. People who almost die, you know, maybe from drowning or something, that's a long time of breath retention, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is what they experience, because there are, you know, the stories of what you see. How is that connected to like what you experience in the mini experience when you do these breath works? Is that something the same? You kind of like you cross the boundary of your consciousness, or I know it's like a spot on question, but I was like, wait.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful question, and I wouldn't be presumptuous enough to answer it. But
No.
I'd love to live with it because it's such a valid one. You know, it's such a wonderful question to think of. It really wouldn't surprise me if we're yeah, it really wouldn't surprise me. I mean, as I'm thinking about it, I'm wondering, like, is it like going beyond life when we breathe like this? Because obviously when we lose our breath, we're going into that what we would call death state, and where people speak of white light and all of these, and the Buddhists call it the bardo, that place in between this life and the next life, that moment of suspension that we live in.
Because it's a beautiful space there. It's so quiet and everything. Like I'm a big fan of breath retention, and I've been just starting the Wim Hof method. But before that, with yoga, with pranayama, I experienced, especially when they first told us, like, you know, 5-6 breaths per minute, and then you become aware that you don't need to inhale, exhale so much. You can be, and just that slow motion and that space of no breathing, it's something magical. And with because I was just doing yesterday and today Wim Hofson is like, that space there is like, that's something. You know,
Yes,
it's like wow. And like you were saying, but doing it consciously gives you the opportunity to be there, or okay, I have to go and make breakfast, I'll just go and do that. And it's and I think the lines blur in between, like, where do you really want to be? You know.
Yeah.
What has been yours most profound experience with breath?
Oh, well, wow. I think I might have to tell you the second most profound, because the first most profound was might shock your listeners, but I'm just going to risk it. I was being made love to by God.
Wow.
But I was neither man nor woman. I was both. I got penetrated by, and I say the word God just because that's the most familiar word for me to use. I you know, by divine force. It was an ecstatic, orgasmic, probably half-hour experience of disbelief, of like the exquisiteness of what's possible. Was not just being touched by that energy, it was literally it was a sexual experience. It was not just an intellectual or an awareness, it was a whole body sensual experience.
Wow.
And I think that was probably the most impactful breath work I've had. And I think perhaps the next most one was where I saw this fountain of water, and it was this beautiful crystal water coming from the ground, and it went into this opened, as it fell away, where it reached its peak, and on top of this water was this little child, this newborn baby, and that was me. And I blessed myself in my utter innocence to connect with that essential part of me that I'd never remembered, never had a chance to reconnect with. So those are probably the two most intense experiences that
that's beautiful. And that's just breath work, just breathing.
Just breath.
Just breathing. Going back to your first experience, actually, I have a question there with people making love. What happens with breathing? How can you improve love making experience with breath work, or how can breath work improve that?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I like this question.
Well, you got on the divine energy and love making.
Yeah. Okay, let me just catch a breath here and see if I can start at the beginning instead of just at fast pace. Well, first of all, they say that couples that breathe together stay together. And I think what the breath has taught me about my sexuality in my couple, with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, is that the hugeness of the experience is denied to us if we don't breathe. Let alone the elements of friction and stimulus and physical stimulus and erogenous zones and all of those, different layers of perhaps superficiality to subtlety. When we bring the breath in to the mix, there is a different quality of noticing that becomes available. And when I began to use breath as a part of my sexual practice, I discovered that what I used to know as a young man, a very active young man in the 60s and 70s and so on, but what I used to know with the massive amount of experience that I'd had was about 1% of the whole picture. And I began to understand, this doesn't even involve touch. This even involves, then it got to be even more extreme, where I would lie with my wife for hours and we would look at each other and breathe and have orgasms. We would have orgasms, not even touching. When I asked, can I touch you with my finger? And she said, yes. And I touched her with my finger and her whole body just exploded. So in other words, we can use the breath to become aware of the subtle. It's now got to the point with her that I'm used to, then it got to the point of just her walking into the room and I would feel a sexual tension and become aware of it. Now I can even do it if she's on the other side of the world. I don't even have to be talking to her. I feel, a way to explain this is perhaps in a more practical way. I don't know if you've ever seen that little drawing that people do of two profiles of people looking at each other, and the shape of the forehead and the nose and then the lips and the chin, and if you look at it in a different way, it looks like a chalice. It looks like this beautiful vase. And when you don't look at the faces and you focus on the gap between the faces, and that gap is extraordinary because it's always changing, wherever, if you're standing up together or on different sides of the room, the nature of that gap is actually the child. It's the creation of your couple, the space that exists between you, and becomes, this is my breath awareness that has told me this, that becomes something that is not just worthy of nurturing and taking care of. It's a third entity. It is the spirit of the child that might want to be born. It's something so precious that it needs to be cared for. And so the whole sexual experience becomes this extraordinary celebration of intimacy in ways that I never really had considered before. I had no idea how huge lovemaking could be until I brought the breath into it. And we do this sometimes in our classes. We have intimacy. We do intimacy work in our workshops and our trainings and so on. All our facilitators are able to facilitate those, which are ways of discovering intimacy in a, I want to say non-sexual way, but of course it's all relative to our sexuality. It's just not in the way that we understand sexuality, or we may have understood.
Exactly. Yeah. For someone who's a couple and who are both interested in breathing and want to, what would be the first thing? Would you just suggest sit across each other and breathe together, or is there another practice, very practical thing?
Yeah, they could do that. They could do that on a Sunday with a breath session. Just look at each other in the eyes and breathe. If you can do that for half an hour, you'll go through a huge journey, a massive journey. Another way that we do it is people lying down facing each other on the floor, and no touch involved, but just breathing a few breaths together, and then exploring making a sound with the exhale. And even if someone that you dearly love and trust, it's a challenge. Because, I don't know why, but it's a challenge, because that sound that you're making is a signature of your soul in some way.
That's so beautiful. Signature of your soul.
Yeah, it's like you're revealing something. We're used to using our mouth to form words and have control and discipline and express ourselves in the best way. And when that sound is just coming from your being, it's not going through the head at all. It's just a pure expression from your inner being. And so that's another wonderful practice, just to sit there and look at each other and make that, or that, I'm in difficulty, or whatever it is that's coming, let it be sounded, let it be.
Yeah. That might be really challenging, I think, especially like you're saying, it's easier to laugh or to say like, oh, I don't feel comfortable, or giggle or something, but just, okay, like, let's just breathe. Oh my God. I'm just imagining it and I would be like, oh, the first few moments probably.
Well, laughing is good. I had a teacher of Tantra many years ago, 20 years ago, who said that laughter is the process of the heart opening. So that's all good. We get to go through that. We get to go through that shyness and the laughter and the giggling and the self-consciousness and underneath there's something else that wants to be seen, that wants to be shared.
No, that's a beautiful sharing. I really appreciate that you shared the best experience, because this is something I've been also talking to, a couple of people around who are into this, that, we so often, we just like do things, as we are told. And like when it comes to lovemaking, it's like people just want to relieve tension instead of having that as something beautiful, something connection, like you're saying, connect your breathing first, and then let's see what happens, what a beautiful experience we can create. And thank you so much. It's really, really, really great.
Good.
Another question for people who want to dive deeper. The Sunday workshop is on there. What else is happening? Because I see you have the breath challenge going on, and
yeah, we often do a breath challenge on the way into our breath camp, which is now becoming a new land-based training that we're starting. And our next one is in April of this year in Italy. Next one after that is in July in Colorado. And these are 10-day intensive transformative workshops. And so that's one option, is to meet us on the ground, where you meet all our teachers and our mentors and the leaders of our community. And we don't just breathe together, but we do some serious inner journeying. We do what we call a hero's journey. We do the alchemist's journey. We work through our birth process, our biography, our family relationships. And the intention of that journey is to come out of it with a practice we can put into place whenever we want, to climb out of the mud or out of that victim place that we sometimes fall into, and become the hero of our own life, to become the author of our own life. So that's one way that people can go deeper. The other way is that we do online courses all the time. We're in the middle of one. In fact, I'm going to be doing one called The Hero's Journey in about an hour from now. And that's a 6-part series that we do. We do another one called Seeds of Alchemy, which is about creating right relationship, how to enter into relationships more consciously, and what kind of guidelines we can use to use them as fertile ground for growth, to break this cycle of falling in love, getting bored, failing, and doing it all over again. But how can we have a sustainable, creative, vibrant, exciting relationship for decades and for the rest of our life, if that's what we want? So we work a lot with relationship and intimacy, and of course all our facilitators are doing one-to-one sessions and group sessions all over the world as well. So.
Beautiful. And I'll post it on the podcast as well, your website, but Alchemy of Breath, right? Is that correct?
That's right. Alchemy of Breath. Yes.
Beautiful. Last question. Well, one of the last ones maybe. What do you think world needs today? What do you see that and you're bringing that into the world as well, bit by bit. What do you think it needs?
Well, the world needs to know that it's okay to be naked.
Okay, now you have to explain that.
Yeah. What I mean by that is that we protect ourselves, and necessarily so, because it's a brutal world. It can be a really, really challenging world. And yet, being damaged as we are by each trauma that occurs, we begin to lose our range of choice. One of the horrible things about being a victim of any circumstance is that we lose our sense of choice. And as we continue through life, our range of choice becomes less and less, and we become more and more huddled and protected against potential danger. We become fear-based and fear-orientated. And so the greatest message I would have for the world is to take that breath into the heart. You know, the shape of the lungs, in that left lung, there's a little bit missing where the heart sits. And each time we breathe, our diaphragm comes up and down underneath the heart. So every breath that we're taking, we're massaging the heart.
No, that's so nice.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. It's true.
It's true,
real.
but like we don't know about it. You just told me something. I was like, wow. Oh yeah, makes sense. Oh, I never knew.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And there was a time I didn't know it too, and it was as much of a surprise to me when I reflected on it as it was to you. And so really, it's about love. You know, how many layers do we have to go through to get to the love, that ocean that we all bathe in our dreams, in our hopes, in our wants, our yearning, that place that we all want and we look outside for all the time, but exists in each of us. And so if we're prepared to go through that journey of disrobing, and that's why I said naked, because if we take off the clothing of protection and we get naked and we discover in that inner place that even though it felt lonely to go there, that's where everybody really connects. You know, after this journey of loneliness and solitude, then we discover that underneath the work, the result is to meet people in a true place. And that's what happens when we breathe together. You've seen it in the groups. You know, it's like people afterwards feel this total connection.
It's total connection. It's just like I know you all. It's like you can't describe it. It's beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I have an inkling feeling, and you may want to edit this from the thing, but I have an inkling feeling that what they used to talk about when I was a kid, you know, the whole idea of church and prayer and gathering together of people on Sundays to worship, I can't help but wonder if this wasn't what they wanted it to be, but couldn't somehow make it. It became dogmatic and full of rules and hierarchies and priests and interpreters and the beauty of the breath is that there's no interpreter, there's no hierarchy. We just breathe. It's a direct relationship with the divine. Nobody, I'm not in charge. I'm just the schmuck who does it on Zoom, or, you know, or stands with the group and tells them to breathe. You know, it's not a very profound role, my role. But the experience is profound. It's as rich as one wants it to be.
Exactly. Well, I wish for a Sunday when everyone is on that Zoom call and breathing together. That's something. Oh my God, I'm so grateful for having you on this on this little podcast journey. So many things that I need to digest and breathe through.
Well, I hope it was of value, and I hope it's of value to all you readers. And please join us, everybody, if you can, on Sunday.
Yeah. Remind the times for those, because I've got listeners all over the place. So.
Okay, there are 2 sessions. There's one on, I'm going to give UK times because that saves having to deal with clock changes and things. But UK time is always 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, and excuse me, I got that wrong, 9:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, and the evening session is at 5 p.m. on Sunday after. So 9:30 and 5 p.m.
Yeah, for those, I was in Panama a lot, so it was 12 o'clock, so noon time, lunchtime, before lunchtime in Panama, you could breathe and then just like go and brunch.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, and have a blessed day.
I will. Thank you. I'm looking forward to my class, and blessings to you. Thank you so much for your interest. And I hope that as many people as possible get touched by the beauty of the breath and what it can do.
They will.